Don't worry about Elena. She's not going anywhere. She never has the guts." Mark Sterling said those words out loud, laughing, while his wife stood 2 feet away, packing the last of her belongings. He was on the phone with Jessica. He did not pause the conversation. He did not lower his voice. He watched Elena lift the final box walk past him without a single word, and he actually smiled. 11 years of marriage, and he still believed she was nothing. Still believed silence meant weakness. Still believed patience meant surrender. By noon the next day, he had lost everything. Subscribe now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. Hook. Mark Sterling laughed while his wife packed her bags. Not a nervous laugh, a real one. He was on the phone with Jessica when Elena walked past him carrying the last box from their bedroom, and he didn't even lower his voice. He said, "Don't worry, baby. She won't do anything." He was so certain, so completely, catastrophically certain. And that certainty that arrogance was the first domino that brought everything crashing down. If this story made your jaw drop, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Part 1. The Perfect Lie. Mark Sterling woke up that Tuesday morning the same way he had woken up for the past 11 years of his marriage, slowly, deliberately, and without guilt. He stretched across the king-sized bed in the Manhattan penthouse, reached for his phone on the nightstand, and smiled at the string of messages waiting for him. Not from Elena, from Jessica. "Last night was perfect," the first message read. "You always know exactly what I need," said the second. "I miss you already." Mark read each one with the same satisfied expression a man wears when he believes he has built an airtight world. He had convinced himself somewhere over the years that he was simply better at managing complexity than other men. His marriage was one compartment, Jessica was another, business was a third, and as long as he kept the walls between those compartments strong, nothing would ever collapse. He typed back quickly, "Tonight if I can get away, keep your schedule open." Then he put the phone down, showered, dressed in the charcoal suit Elena had dry cleaned, and hung perfectly in his closet, and called for his driver. He didn't notice that Elena's car was gone from the garage. He didn't notice that the small framed photo that usually sat on the entryway table had been removed. He didn't notice the silence. Mark Sterling was a man who had spent so long not noticing things about his wife that the habit had become invisible to him. His driver, a quiet man named Thomas, who had worked for the Sterling household for 6 years, held the car door open without a word. Mark slid in, already scrolling through emails, already mentally preparing for his 9 o'clock board meeting. The company, Sterling Capital Group, was in the middle of acquiring a smaller investment firm, and Mark needed his numbers sharp and his confidence sharper. "Busy day?" Thomas asked, pulling into traffic. "Always," Mark said. He didn't look up from his phone. Thomas said nothing else. He had learned over the years that Mr. Sterling didn't invite conversation. He simply expected service. Smooth, invisible, perfectly timed service. Mark arrived at the Sterling Capitol building at 8:45. He rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, accepted his coffee from the front desk without thanking anyone, and walked straight into his corner office, where Jessica was already waiting. Jessica Hartley was 29 years old, with sharp eyes and a warmer smile than she actually meant. She had been Mark's assistant for 3 years and his mistress for 2 of them. She was organized, efficient, and entirely aware that her position in his life depended on his continued interest. She had made peace with that arrangement. "Good morning," she said, standing from the chair across from his desk. "The Meridian acquisition documents are ready for your review. The board meets in 15 minutes. "Close the door," Mark said. She did. He crossed the room, kissed her once firmly, the way a man kisses someone he owns rather than someone he loves. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than you deserve," she said, but she was smiling. "Tonight," he said. "The penthouse, 7 o'clock. "What about Elena?" Mark waved his hand, that gesture, that single dismissive wave of his hand that he used whenever his wife's name entered a conversation he didn't want her in. "She thinks I have a client dinner. She always believes me." Jessica held his gaze for a moment. "You sure about that?" "I've been sure for 11 years, Mark said, straightening his tie in the reflection of his office window. Elena is loyal to a fault. It's practically her only personality trait. That was how he talked about her. Not with cruelty exactly, with something worse than cruelty, with indifference dressed up as affection, as if Elena's loyalty was something he had simply come to expect, like clean shirts and warm meals, and had long since stopped finding remarkable. The board meeting ran 2 hours. Mark performed brilliantly the way he always did in rooms where people were watching. He spoke with precision, commanded every question thrown at him, and walked out with unanimous approval on the Meridian acquisition. His colleagues clapped him on the shoulder. Someone called him a genius. Mark accepted the praise the way he accepted everything as his rightful due. By noon, he was back at his desk eating a sandwich Jessica had ordered for him, reading through contracts. His cell phone rang. The number was his home landline. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then something made him pick up. Mark. The voice was his housekeeper, Rosa. She had worked for them for 9 years. Her voice sounded strange, careful, the way voices sound when someone is trying very hard not to say too much. Rosa, what is it? Mrs. Sterling asked me to call you. A pause. She said you should come home when you have a moment. Is something wrong? Another pause. Longer this time. She just said to come home, Mr. Sterling. He almost said he was busy. He almost told Rosa to tell Elena he'd be home for dinner as planned. But there was something in Rosa's careful silence that pricked at him, something in the way she hadn't said everything is fine, the way she normally would. I'll be there at 2, he said. He told himself it was nothing. Elena had probably found a new piece of artwork she wanted his opinion on. Or perhaps she wanted to discuss their summer travel plans. She had mentioned something about Italy recently, and Mark had half listened the way he always did when she talked about things that didn't affect his schedule. He told himself it was nothing because it was the only thing he knew how to tell himself. Mark arrived home at 2:15. He used his key. He walked in through the front door and immediately registered the stillness of the house. Not a peaceful stillness, something more like a held breath. Elena, he called. No answer. He walked into the kitchen. Rosa was standing near the counter, her hands folded in front of her, her expression carefully arranged into something neutral. On the kitchen island in the center of the marble surface, where Elena usually set out his afternoon coffee, there was a large manila envelope. Rosa, where's Elena? Rosa looked at the envelope. She left this morning, Mr. Sterling. She asked me to make sure you saw that. Mark picked up the envelope. His name was written on the front in Elena's handwriting. Clean, precise letters. Elena had always had beautiful handwriting. He had never once told her that. He opened it. The first thing he pulled out was a letter. 1 page front and back handwritten. He read the first line. Mark, by the time you read this, I will already be gone. Not running away. Simply moving forward into a life that no longer includes your lies. He read it again. Then his eyes dropped to the words below it. I have known about Jessica Hartley for 2 years. The kitchen went cold. Or maybe it was just Mark. He stood very still, reading the words again, sure he had misread them. He had not. I have known for 2 years. I chose to wait. I chose to be certain. I chose to be prepared. Because I knew, Mark, that when I moved, I would only need to move once. He flipped the letter over. The second page was shorter. It listed in simple, direct sentences everything she had done. A divorce attorney, a prenuptial agreement clause, a set of actions she had already taken. Attached behind the letter, held together with a paperclip, was the second document. Divorce papers, already filed. Mark stood in his kitchen holding papers that had already been submitted to a Manhattan court while he had been sitting in a board meeting accepting compliments. Rosa. His voice was strange even to himself. When did she leave? Early this morning, Mr. Sterling, before 7. Did she say where she was going? No, sir. Did she take her things? Rosa hesitated, then quietly, all of them. Mark walked upstairs. He opened the bedroom closet. Elena's side was empty. Every dress, every coat, every shoe. The small jewelry box where she kept the pieces she wore daily. Gone. He opened her dresser. Empty. He went to the bathroom. Her toiletries, her perfumes, the photograph she kept on the vanity of her mother who had passed away years ago. All of it gone. Not hastily, not in a panic. Every drawer was closed, every surface was neat. Elena had removed herself from his life the way she did everything with precision, with dignity, and without making a scene. He went back downstairs. He sat down at the kitchen table. And for the first time in a very long time, Mark Sterling did not know what to do next. Rosa set a glass of water in front of him without being asked. He didn't touch it. He called Elena's cell phone, straight to voicemail. He called again, voicemail again. He tried a third time and heard her voice calm and recorded. "You've reached Elena Sterling. I am unavailable. Please leave a message." The last name. She still had his last name. That detail, for reasons he couldn't articulate, made it feel more real. He didn't leave a message. He went back to the envelope. He had pulled out the letter and the divorce papers. He now reached inside and found a third document. He hadn't noticed it the first time. He unfolded it. It was a printed report, professional, formatted, precise. And as his eyes moved down the page, the floor beneath him seemed to tilt. It was a surveillance report, 22 pages long, photographs, dates, locations, times, Mark at the penthouse, Mark at restaurants, Mark at hotels, Mark in parking garages, Mark walking with Jessica, Mark sitting with Jessica at a corner table in a restaurant he thought no one knew he frequented. 2 years of documentation, every meeting photographed, every location logged, every date recorded. She knew, he said out loud to no one. To the empty kitchen. She knew all of it. Rosa had quietly moved to the hallway. She did not respond. Mark looked at the photographs. His own face stared back at him from 22 pages of evidence that had been built quietly and methodically while he poured Jessica wine and told himself he was untouchable. He thought about the morning he had laughed on the phone while Elena walked past him. He thought about every time he had waved her name away like an inconvenience. He thought about every lie he had told so effortlessly that he had stopped registering them as lies. And then he turned to the fourth document in the envelope. This one was not from Elena's attorney. This one was from a financial institution. It was a single page, a formal notification. And as Mark read it, the remaining color drained from his face. It was a notice regarding the shareholder structure of Sterling Capital Group. Mark read it once, then again. Then a third time, slower word by word, the way you read something when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are telling it. Elena Marcello Sterling held 53% of the outstanding shares of Sterling Capital Group through a holding entity called Marcello Heritage Trust. He knew the name. He had heard it years ago, early in their marriage, when Elena had mentioned it in passing during some conversation about her family's financial history. He had not listened carefully. He had not asked follow-up questions. He had filed it away somewhere unimportant, the way he filed away everything about Elena that didn't directly require his attention. He had never looked it up. He had never investigated it. He had assumed, because he had always assumed, that his company was his. It was not his. It had never been entirely his. His wife, the woman he had described to Jessica that very morning as someone with practically one personality trait, was the majority shareholder of the company he had spent 11 years telling the world he built from nothing. He stood up from the table. He sat back down. He stood up again. "Rosa." His voice cracked on the single syllable. She appeared in the doorway. "Did you know about this?" Rosa looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not sympathy, exactly. Something more complicated. Something that suggested she had known a great deal more than he had ever given her credit for. "It's not my place to know things like that, Mr. Sterling," she said, which was not a no. Mark picked up his phone and called his personal attorney, a man named Howard Briggs, who had handled his contracts for 8 years. Howard answered on the second ring. "Mark, I've been expecting your call." The words hit like a punch. "Expecting my call." "What does that mean?" A heavy pause. "Elena's attorney reached out to our office this morning. Standard notification process. I have to tell you, Mark, this is quite a filing. The prenuptial clause alone is going to—" "What clause?" Mark's voice rose. "What are you talking about? The infidelity clause, Mark. It was in the original prenuptial agreement, Section 7, Paragraph 3. In the event of documented marital infidelity, Elena retains all community assets accumulated during the marriage, and the Marcello Heritage Trust reclaims full operational authority over Sterling Capital Group. She has documentation, a great deal of documentation. Mark pressed his palm flat against the kitchen island to keep himself upright. That clause was never going to be enforced. That was a formality. Every prenup has Mark. Howard's voice was quieter now, gentler, the voice of a man delivering a sentence. She filed this morning at 8 o'clock. The documentation they submitted is comprehensive. I've seen the surveillance file. There is nothing ambiguous here. I'm sorry. Can we fight it? A pause that lasted 3 full seconds. You can always file a response. But given the evidence, given the clause, given that the shares were never actually transferred to you in the first place, Mark, I have to be honest with you, as your attorney and as someone who respects you, you would be spending money you may not have access to in order to fight a case that the documentation does not support. Mark stood in his kitchen. His charcoal suit, the one Elena had dry cleaned, felt suddenly heavy. How long? He asked. How long what? How long has she been planning this? Another long pause. Based on the dates in the surveillance file and the legal filings she had already prepared, I would estimate she began building this case approximately 2 years ago, maybe slightly longer. 2 years. While he had been laughing, while he had been waving her name away, while he had been completely catastrophically certain that she would never do anything. Elena Sterling had spent 2 years building a case so airtight that his own attorney was telling him not to fight it. Mark ended the call. He went to his office in the house, the private one with the locked desk, where he kept documents he didn't want anyone to see. He unlocked the bottom drawer, pulled out the company financial reports he kept copies of at home. He spread them on the desk. He started reading them differently now, looking for what he had never thought to look for before. The Marcello Heritage Trust appeared in footnotes, in quarterly filings, in shareholder reports he had glanced at and signed without reading carefully. It had always been there. Visible, documented, legally recorded. He had simply never looked. He had never looked because he had never believed he needed to. His phone rang again. This time, the number was his CFO, Raymond Park. Raymond? Mark. Raymond's voice was tense, clipped. I just received notice from Elena's legal team. They've filed for an emergency board review citing the shareholder agreement. I've confirmed the trust holdings. Mark, I have to ask you directly. Did you know about this? It's being handled, Mark said. Mark 53% means she calls the shareholder vote. If she calls a vote before we can... I said it's being handled. He hung up. He called Jessica. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright, not yet knowing. Hey, you. Counting down to 7 o'clock? Elena filed for divorce, he said. Silence. She has a surveillance file. 2 years of documentation. She's invoking the infidelity clause in the prenup. More silence. Then carefully, what does that mean for you? She controls the company, Mark said. Or she's moving to. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was the silence of a calculation being made. Jessica. His voice softened almost against his will. I need you right now. Tonight we should talk. I need... Mark. Her voice had changed. The warmth had not disappeared slowly. It had switched off, like a light. I think we need to step back right now. This is a lot. I need some time to process this. Process this, Jessica? I'll call you. She hung up. He stood holding the phone. The word she had used sat in his chest like a stone. Process. As if he were a problem to be evaluated. As if 2 years of whispered hotel rooms and carefully exchanged messages could be set aside while she determined whether he was still worth the investment. He went back to the kitchen. Rosa had left. The house was completely quiet now. He sat at the kitchen island with the envelope in front of him. The letter, the divorce papers, the surveillance report, the shareholder notice, 4 documents that had dismantled his entire life in the space of 3 hours. He picked up Elena's letter again. He read it from the beginning, this time slowly. He read the parts he had skimmed in shock the first time. There was a line near the end of the second page that he had missed. You believed that because I never raised my voice, I wasn't watching. You believed that because I kept your house and honored our life, I had nothing of my own. You were wrong about so many things, Mark, but you were most wrong about this. You believed that my silence was surrender. It was not surrender, it was patience, and I have been very, very patient. He set the letter down, Thayeen. For the first time in 11 years of marriage, Mark Sterling read his wife's words and understood them completely, and understanding them for the first time terrified him. Mark spent the rest of that Tuesday afternoon doing something he had not done in years. He sat still, not by choice. His body simply refused to move with the same confidence it had carried that morning. The man who had walked into his board meeting at 9 o'clock commanding every person in the room was now sitting at his own kitchen table alone reading a letter from his wife for the third time. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again. He called Elena. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He typed a message. Elena, we need to talk. Please call me back. He stared at it for 30 seconds before sending it. Then he watched the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that would tell him she was typing back. The dots never appeared. He called Howard Briggs again. His attorney picked up immediately, which told Mark that Howard had been waiting for exactly this call. I need to understand the full picture, Mark said. Walk me through everything. Howard exhaled. All right. The prenuptial agreement was drafted before your marriage 11 years ago. Elena's family attorney was involved in the original drafting. The infidelity clause was not standard language, Mark. It was specifically negotiated. At the time, I believe you signed it without reviewing it carefully. Do you remember signing it? Mark remembered the day vaguely. He remembered being impatient. He remembered thinking the prenup was a formality that protected him, not one that could ever be turned against him. He remembered Elena sitting quietly across the table while attorneys talked, and he remembered thinking she looked nervous. He had been wrong about that, too. She hadn't been nervous. She had been focused. I signed it, Mark said. The clause states that in the event of documented infidelity, Elena retains all marital assets accumulated during the marriage, and the Marcello Heritage Trust, which she controls, regains full operational and voting authority over Sterling Capital Group. She doesn't just own 53%, Mark. She owns the right to remove you from any executive position within the company. That right is now active. Can the board block her? The board answers to the majority shareholder. She is the majority shareholder. Mark stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the world was moving normally. Cars, people, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday afternoon that had no idea his entire life was being disassembled in this kitchen. What about my salary, my personal accounts? Your personal accounts are yours, but the company accounts the corporate credit cards, the expense accounts, the housing allowances paid through the company, those are subject to the shareholder authority. Mark, I strongly advise you to... She can't freeze my personal accounts. Those are separate. She hasn't touched your personal accounts, Howard said carefully. Yet. That single word. Yet. It landed in Mark's chest and stayed there. He ended the call. He went immediately to his laptop and logged into his personal banking portal. His accounts loaded. He stared at the numbers, his personal savings, his individual investment account. The numbers were there intact. He breathed. Then he opened the corporate account portal out of habit, the one he accessed a dozen times a day, and found the screen blank. His credentials no longer worked. He tried again. Nothing. He picked up his corporate cell phone, the second phone the company provided, and tried to access his email. The screen showed a single line, account suspended, contact system administrator. He called the IT department of Sterling Capital Group. A young man answered, This is Mark Sterling. My corporate credentials have been suspended. Fix it immediately. A pause on the other end. The kind of pause that happens when someone very junior is about to say something to someone very senior that they would rather not say. Mr. Sterling, I was given instructions this morning by the office of the majority shareholder. All executive credentials associated with your profile have been placed under a security review. I don't have authorization to override that. The majority shareholder who gave that instruction. It came through the legal office representing Marcello Heritage Trust, sir. Mark hung up. He sat back down. He pressed both hands flat on the table. He thought about the timeline Howard had described. Elena had begun building this case 2 years ago, which meant that 2 years ago, while he was already deep into his arrangement with Jessica, Elena was not crying in a corner of their bedroom. She was not confiding in friends. She was not falling apart. She was hiring a private investigator. She was consulting attorneys. She was reviewing shareholder documents. She was constructing quietly and without a single visible sign of distress the most precise legal dismantling he had ever seen. And he had been in the same house with her, eating dinner across from her, accepting the clean suits she arranged and the coffee she made, looking directly at her face every morning and seeing nothing because he had decided long ago that there was nothing there worth seeing. His phone buzzed. A text from Raymond Park, his CFO. "Mark, the board has received formal notice of an emergency shareholder meeting, scheduled for Friday morning. Elena's attorneys have submitted the full documentation package to every board member. I don't know how to say this gently, it's very thorough." Mark typed back, "I'll be there." Raymond's response came after a pause that felt too long. "Mark, I think you should speak with Howard before Friday. The documentation, it's not just the affair. There are financial elements in the filing that I wasn't expecting." Mark read that message 3 times. Financial elements. He didn't respond. He called Howard again. "What financial elements?" he said the moment Howard picked up. Howard was quiet for a moment that told Mark everything. "The filing includes an internal audit request. Elena's attorneys are claiming that certain company expenditures over the past 2 years may have been mischaracterized. Corporate card charges, expense reports, entertainment accounts." A pause. "Mark, some of those charges were for the penthouse, for restaurants, for hotel stays. If those were logged as business expenses..." "That's standard practice," Mark said quickly. Too quickly. "That depends entirely on how they were categorized. If they were listed as client entertainment..." "Howard, Mark, I need you to tell me honestly. Were personal expenses run through company accounts?" The silence between them stretched. "I need to think," Mark said. "Mark." He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table until the light outside began to change. He was still wearing the charcoal suit. He hadn't eaten since the sandwich at noon. He hadn't moved from this table except to make phone calls that had each in sequence delivered a new level of damage. His phone rang. He grabbed it, hoping without logic that it would be Elena. It was his mother. He let it go to voicemail. His phone rang again. A number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, then answered. "Mr. Sterling." A woman's voice. Professional, crisp. "Yes. My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm the lead attorney representing your wife in this matter. Elena has asked me to inform you that she is safe and does not wish to be contacted directly at this time. All communication should go through our office." Mark's grip tightened on the phone. "I want to speak with my wife." "That is not something I can facilitate at this time, Mr. Sterling." "She's still my wife." "For now, yes," Catherine Walsh said, and there was nothing unkind in her voice. Just precision. The precision of someone who had prepared for exactly this conversation. "I also want to advise you that a copy of our filing has been submitted to the relevant financial regulatory bodies as part of a separate inquiry. I would strongly suggest you consult with your attorney about that matter. Have a good evening, Mr. Sterling." She hung up. Mark stared at the phone in his hand. Regulatory bodies. The words moved through him slowly, the way cold water moves through a body that isn't ready for it. He thought about the expense reports, the corporate card charges, the penthouse, the hotels, the restaurants where he had taken Jessica logged under client entertainment codes, never questioned by accounting because Mark Sterling didn't get questioned by accounting. He had done it so casually, so routinely. It had felt like one of the many small privileges of his position so normalized that he had stopped registering it as anything other than the cost of doing business the way he did business. But someone had looked at it differently. Someone had pulled those records, matched them against dates, matched the dates against the surveillance photographs, and drawn a very straight line between the expense charges and the personal nature of the evenings they represented. Elena, or someone working very carefully on her behalf, had done the accounting he had never imagined anyone would do. His phone buzzed again. Text from Jessica. "Hey, checking in. How are you holding up?" He almost didn't answer. Then he typed, "Not well. I need to talk tonight. Are you free? The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Mark. I've been thinking, this whole situation, I don't want to be in the middle of a legal battle. You understand that, right? I have my own career to think about. You won't be in the middle of anything. I just need to talk. A longer pause. I don't think that's a good idea right now. I think we should both take some space. He put the phone down. He did not throw it. He did not slam it. He placed it carefully on the table beside Elena's letter, with the controlled movement of a man who understands on some cellular level that he is starting to lose things and cannot afford to lose anything else. He called Thomas, his driver. "Thomas, I need you to take me to the penthouse." A pause. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Mark changed out of the charcoal suit. He put on something simpler. He looked at Elena's side of the closet again as he passed it. The empty hangers, the bare shelves. He had not allowed himself to fully register it the first time. He registered it now. She had not left in a hurry. She had left in order. Everything was thoughtfully, deliberately cleared. Elena had packed herself out of this house the way she had done everything in their marriage, quietly, completely, and without asking for his attention. Thomas drove him to the Manhattan penthouse. Mark rode up in the elevator, unlocked the door, and walked in. The apartment was intact. Jessica's presence was everywhere in small ways, a throw blanket on the couch, a coffee mug. She favored a book she had been reading left open on the counter. Mark sat down in the chair by the window and called Jessica again. This time she didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Jessica, I know this is hard. I understand you're scared, but I need you right now. Please call me back." He waited. She did not call back. He ordered food that he didn't eat. He watched his phone screen go dark, light up with messages from Raymond, from his mother, from 2 board members, from Howard. He answered none of them. He sat in the penthouse that had once felt like freedom and now felt like the most accurate measure of everything he had traded for it. At some point past midnight, he fell asleep in the chair. He woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of his phone ringing. Howard again. "Mark, I need you to hear this before the board meeting. I spoke with Elena's attorney last night, Catherine Walsh. Mark, the shareholder notice wasn't the only action filed yesterday." Mark sat up straight. "What else?" "The Marcello Heritage Trust has formally requested a review of executive compensation and expense allocations going back 4 years. They've also notified the company's outside auditor. And Mark," another of Howard's deliberate pauses that always preceded something Mark didn't want to hear. "The regulatory filing is with the SEC. They flagged the expense categorization issue as a potential misreporting matter." The SEC. Mark said it flatly, as if saying it quietly enough might reduce its size. "It's preliminary at this stage, but I want you to understand the landscape you're walking into. This is no longer just a divorce." Mark stood up. He paced the length of the room. "She reported me to the SEC. Elena's attorneys submitted documentation to multiple parties simultaneously. Mark, I've been practicing law for 31 years. This is one of the most coordinated legal actions I have ever seen from a private individual. Whoever she hired to build this case was exceptional." Mark stopped pacing. "Who did she hire?" A pause. "Hargrove Associates. They're the best private investigation firm in New York, possibly on the East Coast. Their surveillance work is court grade. Every photograph, every date log, every financial notation is admissible." Hargrove Associates. Mark knew the name. He had once considered hiring them himself years ago for a corporate espionage matter. He had been quoted a fee that made him whistle and call them unnecessarily expensive. Elena had apparently found the fee acceptable. "Howard, what is the most important thing I need to do before Friday?" "Don't talk to anyone outside of our office without counsel present. Don't touch any company financial documents. Don't contact Elena. And Mark, don't do anything that could be interpreted as attempting to interfere with the investigation." "What kind of interference?" "Contacting company employees to discuss the matter, accessing systems you've been locked out of, trying to move assets, anything that looks reactive rather than cooperative." Howard's voice dropped slightly. "Mark, I want to say something to you as your attorney, but also as someone who knows you. The moment you got that envelope yesterday, you lost control of this situation. I don't mean that harshly. I mean it practically. Elena and her team controlled the timing, the documentation, the legal filings, the regulatory notifications, and the board communication. Everything. You are going to need to accept that the best strategy right now is not to fight harder. It is to stop making it worse. Mark stood in the penthouse. Morning light was coming through the windows. He had never once opened himself, because there had always been someone else to open them. "She was always smarter than me," he said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. It came out before he could stop it. Howard said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'll see you Thursday afternoon to prepare for Friday." Mark hung up. He sat back in the chair. He thought about the board meeting Friday. He thought about walking into that room where he had commanded people his entire career and sitting across from a woman he had dismissed for 11 years. He thought about what it would feel like to watch her exercise authority over a company he had introduced at every party and every dinner as the thing he had built from nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't have saved. He opened it. "Mark, it's David Vance. I've seen the board notice. I think we need to talk before Friday. Not as adversaries, as people who care about the company's future. Call me." David Vance. Mark read the name twice. David Vance had been a senior vice president at Sterling Capital Group for 4 years. He was methodical, well-liked, and notably loyal to the company's long-term strategy over short-term gains. Mark had always found him slightly irritating for exactly that reason. David didn't move fast enough for Mark's taste. He asked too many questions. He cared too much about process. Mark had also at various points suspected that David and Elena knew each other beyond the standard social functions of company life. He had never investigated it. He had never thought it mattered. He stared at David's message now and understood with a certainty that settled into his bones that it mattered a great deal. He did not call David back. He set the phone down face up and watched the screen go dark. In the 2-year window that Elena had used to build her case, Mark had been laughing. He had been certain. He had been waving her name away. And David Vance had been there. Consistent, patient, unhurried. Present in the peripheral vision of Mark's life in a way that Mark had never once taken seriously. He pressed his hands together. He sat in the silence of the penthouse and felt the full weight of what he had spent 2 years not paying attention to. Everything Elena had done, she had done without rushing, without revealing, without a single moment of visible anger. She had assembled the legal architecture of his destruction the way a master builder assembles a structure foundation, first walls, second roof, last. And by the time Mark had walked through his front door Tuesday afternoon, expecting breakfast and forgiveness, the building was already complete. He was not being destroyed by betrayal. He was being held accountable by precision. And he was only beginning to understand the difference. Mark did not sleep again after Howard's call. He sat in the penthouse chair until 7 in the morning, turning the same thoughts over and over the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking for a side that isn't sharp. There wasn't one. At 7:15, he showered, put on fresh clothes he kept at the penthouse, and made himself coffee. His hands were steady. He told himself that was a good sign. He told himself that steady hands meant he was thinking clearly, that he was still in control of something, even if that something was only the coffee maker. He called Jessica one more time. 4 rings, voicemail. He did not leave a message this time. He called Raymond Park instead. Raymond answered on the first ring with the careful voice of a man who had been awake worrying. "Mark, are you all right?" "I need a full briefing before Friday. Every board member's position. Who's leaning which direction. Who's already spoken with Elena's attorneys. Can you get me that?" A pause. "Mark, I need to be straight with you. 3 board members have already confirmed they'll be attending Friday's meeting at the request of the Marcello Heritage Trust. That's not unusual procedurally, but the fact that they confirmed so quickly suggests they've already reviewed the documentation." "Which 3? Raymond told him. Mark listened. 2 of the names were people he had appointed himself, men he had considered loyal, men he had taken to dinners included in bonus rounds trusted with sensitive negotiations. "They've seen the surveillance file," Mark asked. "The full package was distributed electronically yesterday afternoon. Every board member received it." Mark thought about 22 pages of surveillance photographs. Every board member people he had looked in the eye for years had now seen those photographs, had now read the dates, had now matched those dates against company expense records that told a very specific story. "I'll be at the office by noon," Mark said. Raymond's pause was brief but unmistakable. "Mark, I don't think that's advisable. Your credentials have been suspended. Building security has been updated. I don't want you to—" He stopped. "You don't want me to what?" "I don't want you to walk into a situation that's harder than it needs to be." Mark understood what Raymond was not saying. His building, his office, his name on the lobby directory, and he would not be allowed in. "I see," Mark said. He hung up. He stood in the penthouse kitchen. He had built Sterling Capital Group from a 2-room startup in his late 20s into a firm that managed billions. He had hired every senior person in that building. He had chosen the office furniture, approved the renovation, selected the location. His name was on the wall in brushed steel letters 3 feet high. And Raymond Park, his CFO, his employee, was gently telling him he could not walk through the front door. Mark picked up his jacket and left the penthouse. He took a taxi because he didn't call Thomas. He needed to move without being watched, without being driven somewhere and reported on. The taxi dropped him 2 blocks from the Sterling Capitol building. He walked the rest of the way. He stood on the sidewalk across the street. He looked at the building. The lobby was visible through the glass frontage. He could see the reception desk, the security station, the brushed steel letters above the elevator bank. Sterling. A security guard he recognized was at the front desk. The man looked up, looked directly at Mark through the glass, and then looked away. Not with hostility. With something more uncomfortable than hostility. With the careful non-recognition of someone who has been given new instructions and is following them precisely. Mark stood on that sidewalk for 60 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to the taxi stand. He went back to the penthouse. He called Howard at 9 o'clock. "The board meeting is Friday. I want to be there. Do I have the right to attend?" "As a former executive and shareholder of record, you have the right to request attendance. However, Elena's attorneys have already submitted a motion to conduct the meeting under closed shareholder session. That means only voting shareholders and their legal representatives. I'm a shareholder. You hold 11%, Mark, purchased through options over the years. Elena's trust holds 53%. The remaining 36% is distributed among the other board members and institutional holders." A pause. 11% does not give you a controlling voice in a closed session. "But I can still attend." "You can request it. I would not recommend it." "Why not?" "Because walking into that room on Friday with the full documentation package distributed with 3 board members already aligned with Elena's position, with the SEC inquiry, pending Mark, it will not help you. It will look like desperation, and the one thing you cannot afford right now is to look desperate." Mark pressed his palm against his forehead. "So I just don't go. I just let her walk in and take everything." Howard's voice was careful. "She's not taking anything that wasn't already legally hers, Mark. That's the part I need you to sit with before Friday. The Marcello Trust has held that majority stake since before you were married. This isn't a seizure. This is an activation of existing rights." Mark ended the call. He sat down on the couch. The throw blanket Jessica favored was still there. He shoved it to the other end without thinking about it. His phone buzzed. A news alert. He had a Google alert set for his own name's standard executive practice. He opened it. The headline read, "Sterling Capital Group announces emergency shareholder review amid executive shakeup." The article was brief. It cited unnamed sources close to the board. It mentioned the Marcello Heritage Trust without explanation. It did not name Elena. It did not name Jessica. But it described the situation with enough precision that anyone who knew the company would understand exactly what was happening. Mark read it twice. Then he searched his name. 3 more articles had appeared in the last 2 hours. Financial news outlets. One carried the headline, "Sterling Capital Majority Shareholder Moves to Assume Operational Authority." Another, "Questions Raised Over Executive Expense Reporting at Sterling Capital." He was in the financial press, not as the visionary executive who had built a billion-dollar firm, as a liability. His personal phone rang. The call was from his mother again. This time he answered. "Mark." Her voice was the voice of a woman who had read the news and was pretending she hadn't. "How are you?" "I've been better. I saw something online. Mom, I can't talk about it right now. Is Elena—" "Mom." His voice came out harder than he intended. "I'm handling it. I'll call you when I can." He hung up and immediately felt the specific sour guilt of having been short with someone who didn't deserve it. His phone rang again within 2 minutes. Not his mother this time. Jessica. He answered before the second ring. Jessica. Mark. Her voice was taut-controlled. I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to listen without getting emotional. The phrase, without getting emotional, hit him strangely. He had never been accused of being emotional in his life. He had been accused of the opposite. Go ahead. I spoke with the company's HR director this morning. Apparently, Elena's attorneys have submitted documentation to HR as well, about our relationship, about the nature of my role. A pause. They're suggesting my hiring and promotion may have been influenced by the personal relationship. Mark said nothing. Mark, that could affect my employment status, my professional reputation. I have a career that exists outside of us. I need to protect that. I understand. I don't think you do. Her voice sharpened. I'm going to cooperate fully with whatever process HR initiates. I want you to know that. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to protect myself. What does cooperating fully mean? Another pause. The kind that means the answer is already decided, and the speaker is simply choosing the best way to deliver it. It means I'm going to be honest about the timeline of our relationship, about how it started, about the nature of it. Mark, why have to? If I don't get ahead of this, they can frame it in a way that makes me look, you're going to give them a statement, Mark said. I have to. Against me. It's not against you, it's Jessica. He said her name quietly. 2 days ago, I was at the penthouse telling you I'd see you at 7 o'clock. You sent me 3 messages that morning. You said last night was perfect. You said I always knew what you needed. The silence on her end was absolute. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, Mark continued, and he meant it, which surprised him. I'm saying it because I want to understand exactly where I am, and where I am right now is alone. Jessica's voice when it came back was softer. Mark, I'm sorry. I genuinely am. But you have to understand, when I met you, you told me your marriage was over in every way that mattered. You told me Elena was fine with the arrangement. You told me— I lied, Mark said. Another silence. I know that now, Jessica said. I think I knew it before, but I chose to believe what you told me because it was easier. A pause. I'm sorry, I really am. But I can't go down with you, Mark. I'm 29 years old. He held the phone against his ear for a moment after she finished speaking. Then he said, Take care of yourself, Jessica. And he meant that too. He ended the call. He set the phone on the coffee table. He looked at the throw blanket at the other end of the couch. Then he stood up, picked it up, folded it carefully, and set it on the side table. He didn't know why he did that. Something about leaving things messy felt wrong now in a way it never had before. Thursday morning arrived the way Thursday mornings do when you haven't properly slept since Tuesday too fast and too loud. Mark met Howard at his attorney's office at 9 o'clock sharp. Howard had printed every relevant document and arranged them across the conference table with the systematic care of a man who understood that the territory ahead was not good, but could be made less catastrophic with the right navigation. Before we begin, Howard said, I want to share something with you. I spoke again with Catherine Walsh last evening, off the record. He paused. Elena is not interested in putting you in prison, Mark. That is not her objective. Mark looked up. Then what is her objective? The company. Clean. Without you. And without the complications your presence creates. Howard folded his hands. The SEC matter is concerning, but it's preliminary. If you cooperate fully, disclose voluntarily, and do not obstruct, the likelihood of criminal charges is lower. It's the cover-up that destroys men in these situations, not the original conduct. What exactly did I do that's criminal? Mark asked, though he already knew the shape of the answer. Mischaracterizing personal expenses as business expenses and recording them in official company filings is a securities matter if the amounts are material. We're looking at the numbers. Some of them are unfortunately material. Howard pushed a spreadsheet across the table. 4 years of corporate card charges that corresponded with your personal activities. The total is not small. Mark looked at the numbers on the spreadsheet. He had never thought about them as a total before. Individually, each charge had felt reasonable, justifiable. The kind of thing executives did. Seeing them accumulated across 4 years, formatted in a spreadsheet with dates that matched perfectly against surveillance photographs, they looked like something else entirely. "What do I do?" Mark said. "You cooperate. You disclose. You let me talk to the SEC before they come to you. And you do not under any circumstances attempt to access company systems, contact company employees about this matter, or do anything that looks like you're trying to manage information." Mark nodded. "There's one more thing." Howard slid another document across the table. "The board met yesterday, informally ahead of Friday's official session. A resolution has already been drafted. The official Friday meeting will be brief." Mark picked up the document. It was a formal resolution of the Sterling Capital Group Board of Directors. It removed Mark Sterling from his position as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, and appointed an interim operational committee, pending a full leadership review. He read it once, he put it down, he picked it up and read it again. "They met without me," he said, "informally, as permitted under the shareholder agreement when operational stability is at risk. They already voted. The informal session established consensus. Friday is procedural at this point." Mark set the document down on top of the spreadsheet. He looked at the 2 pieces of paper side by side. His career and his legal exposure sitting together on a conference table in his attorney's office. "Before breakfast, she took my marriage," he said quietly. "Before lunch, my career. Before sunset. Mark." He stopped. He hadn't realized he was speaking out loud. "I know this is devastating," Howard said, and for the first time since Tuesday, his voice carried something that wasn't purely professional. "I know you're in a great deal of pain right now, but I need you focused, because Friday is not the end of this. What happens after Friday matters more." Mark straightened in his chair. "Then tell me what happens after Friday." Howard leaned forward. "You accept the board's decision without a public statement. You let our office issue a cooperative press release. You engage fully with the SEC disclosure process, and you give Elena's attorneys no additional ammunition." He paused. "And Mark, you stay away from the company. No calls to employees, no contact with board members, no visits to the building." "And Jessica's statement." Howard's expression shifted slightly. "Her statement has already been submitted to HR and to Elena's legal team. She was cooperative and detailed. It corroborates the timeline in the surveillance file." Mark absorbed this. He had expected it. He had known from the moment Jessica said the word cooperate on the phone exactly what cooperation would look like. And yet, hearing it stated plainly still felt like a stone dropping. "She wasted no time," he said. "No," Howard agreed. She did not. Friday came. Mark did not attend the board meeting. He sat in Howard's office 2 miles away and waited. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Howard received a text from a colleague at 9:57. He read it, set his phone down, and looked at Mark. "It's done," Howard said. Mark nodded. He had known it was coming. Knowing it was coming had not made it smaller. "What's the vote?" "Unanimous. The resolution passed without dissent." A pause. "Mark, I want you to hear this from me before it hits the press. David Vance has been named interim CEO pending the leadership review." Mark sat very still. David Vance. The man who had texted him Monday night asking to talk before Friday. The man whose name had appeared in Mark's peripheral vision for years as a detail too small to examine closely. The man who had been patient, consistent, and present in ways that Mark had never thought to question. "How long has Vance been involved in this?" Mark asked. Howard chose his words carefully. "I cannot speak to the internal dynamics of the company. What I can tell you is that his appointment is consistent with his seniority and track record." "That's not what I asked." Howard looked at him. "Mark, let it go." Mark stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment looking at a street he had driven down 1,000 times on the way to a building that no longer bore his authority. He thought about David Vance's text message. "Not as adversaries, as people who care about the company's future." He had read that and felt irritated. He had filed it away as a political maneuver from a junior executive trying to position himself. He had been wrong. Again. In the same way he had been wrong about Elena, about Jessica, about the expense reports, about the prenup, about all of it. He had been wrong because he had stopped looking carefully at anything that didn't immediately serve him. He turned back to Howard. "What do I do now?" Howard folded his hands on the table. "Now you go home, Mark. Not the penthouse. Home. You answer no press calls. You make no statements. You let this news cycle pass. And Monday morning, you come back here and we begin the disclosure process with the SEC." "And Elena?" Howard met his eyes. "Elena is done. She moved on before she ever sent you that envelope." Mark put on his jacket. He picked up his phone. He walked to the door of the conference room and then he stopped. "Howard." He turned around. "The surveillance firm she hired. Hargrove Associates. The best on the East Coast, you said." "That's right. How much does something like that cost 2 years of work?" Howard thought for a moment. "A comprehensive 2-year surveillance and documentation package of that quality with court-grade submissions. You're looking at several $100,000. At minimum." Mark stood in the doorway. "She spent that, out of her own money, to make sure she was certain before she moved." "It appears so." He thought about that. He thought about Elena sitting across from him at dinner tables, asking questions he half-answered, listening to stories he half-told. He thought about her moving through their house with her quiet efficiency, her careful attention to things he barely noticed. He had called it her only personality trait, loyalty. He had called it boring. It had not been boring. It had been the discipline of someone who understood exactly what they were doing and why they were taking the time to do it correctly. He walked out of Howard's office. Outside, the city moved around him with the indifference cities have toward individual disasters. Taxis, people on phones, someone arguing at a food cart. The mechanical ordinary roar of a Thursday morning that had just swallowed his career whole and was already digesting it without ceremony. His cell phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Sterling?" A man's voice, formal, direct. "My name is Agent Gerald Marsh. I'm with the Financial Crimes Unit of the SEC. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you at your earliest convenience. We've received a disclosure from Sterling Capital Group, and we'd like to discuss some items with you. This is voluntary at this stage. Your cooperation would be appreciated." Mark stood on the sidewalk. Traffic moved past him. "My attorney is Howard Briggs," Mark said. "All contact should go through him." "Of course," Agent Marsh said pleasantly. "We'll be in touch with Mr. Briggs this afternoon." Mark hung up. He stood on the sidewalk. He had not eaten since Thursday morning. He had not slept properly since Monday night. He was standing outside his attorney's office, holding a phone that had just delivered in sequence the end of his marriage, his career, his finances, his personal relationship, his board position, and now a contact from the SEC. All of it had happened between Tuesday afternoon and Friday morning. 3.5 days. Elena had spent 2 years preparing 3.5 days. He hailed a cab. He gave the address of his house, not the penthouse, the house where Elena's empty closet was waiting for him, and Rosa was probably still moving quietly through the rooms, maintaining order in a life that no longer had the shape it used to. He rode in silence, watching the city pass outside the window, and he thought about the last line of Elena's letter, the one about patience, the one he had read and finally too late understood. She was right. She had always been right. And somewhere across this city, Elena Sterling was already building something that did not include him. The house felt different when Mark walked back into it Friday afternoon. Not smaller exactly, just emptier in a way that had nothing to do with the missing furniture or Elena's cleared closet. It was the kind of empty that lives in the air of a place where someone used to be and isn't anymore, a quality of silence that isn't peaceful, that just waits. Rosa was in the kitchen when he came in. She looked up, read his face in 1 second the way people do when they've worked closely with someone long enough to know all their expressions, and then quietly poured him a glass of water and set it on the counter without a word. "Thank you, Rosa," he said. She nodded. She moved toward the hallway. "Rosa?" She stopped. He looked at her. "Did she tell you? Before she left? Did Elena tell you what she was planning?" Rosa turned around slowly. She had worked in this house for 9 years. She had watched Mark wave Elena out of conversations. She had watched Elena absorb it, smile quietly, and move on. She had watched all of it from the careful, invisible position of someone whose job requires discretion, and whose conscience sometimes makes discretion feel like a weight. "Mrs. Sterling told me she was leaving," Rosa said. "The morning before. She told me to take care of you." A pause. Those were her exact words. Take care of him. Mark pressed his lips together. Even then. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, even then." He picked up the water glass. He drank half of it. He set it down. "Rosa, I want you to know your position here is secure. Whatever happens with the finances, you will be paid. I'll make sure of that." Rosa looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted very slightly into something that might have been the first genuine warmth she had shown him in years. "Thank you," she said, and she walked out. Mark sat at the kitchen table, the same table where 4 days ago he had opened an envelope that had ended his world. The envelope was gone now. He had left it at Howard's office, but the table remembered it. He remembered it. He suspected he would remember sitting at this exact table in this exact chair for the rest of his life. He opened his laptop. He went to the financial news sites. The board meeting had been reported. The headline was measured but clear: Sterling Capital Group completes leadership transition. David Vance named interim CEO. The article described the transition as a response to a strategic review initiated by the company's majority shareholder. Mark's name appeared once in a single sentence described as the outgoing executive. Outgoing. As if he had simply chosen to leave, as if he had packed a bag and said his goodbyes and walked out with dignity. He closed the laptop. He went upstairs. He changed out of the clothes he had been wearing since that morning and put on something comfortable. He sat on the edge of the bed that had been his and Elena's for 11 years and looked at the wall across from him. She had chosen the color of that wall, a warm gray that he had initially objected to, and then over time come to find restful. He had never told her that either. He thought about Howard's advice. Cooperate. Stay quiet. Let the news cycle pass. Don't reach out to company employees. Don't contact Elena. He knew Howard was right. He also knew the way you know things about yourself that you'd rather not, that staying quiet was the one thing in his life he had never been good at. Saturday passed in a grinding stillness. Mark answered emails from family members who had seen the news and were carefully asking if he was all right without directly asking what had happened. He gave short, non-committal answers. He called his brother in Chicago, who listened without interrupting for 10 solid minutes, which was the most useful thing anyone had done for him all week. He ate meals Rosa left for him. He slept badly. Sunday morning, he woke at 5 a.m. with a thought that had been forming at the back of his mind since Friday, growing slowly the way dangerous thoughts do, collecting arguments, building justification. He knew things about Sterling Capital Group that no one else knew, internal things, operational details, accounting structures, decisions that had been made years ago before Elena had activated her authority decisions that involved the company's financial reporting in ways that were not strictly clean. He knew these things because he had made some of those decisions himself. But he also knew things about the Marcello Heritage Trust, about how Elena's family wealth had been structured, about certain transfers and valuations from years ago that had been done in a way that, if examined closely by the right people, might raise questions of their own. He had never examined those things closely. He had never needed to, but he had seen documents. He had been in meetings. He had heard conversations that Elena's family had not been careful enough to exclude him from in the early years of their marriage, when they had still trusted his discretion. He sat in his kitchen at 5 in the morning and thought about those conversations. He told himself he was simply reviewing what he knew, being thorough, being prepared. He told himself it wasn't what it looked like. He called Howard at 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Howard answered with the tone of a man who had been an attorney long enough to recognize a Sunday morning call from a client in trouble. "Mark, what's happened?" "Nothing's happened. I want to discuss something. Strategically." "All right." Careful. "Go ahead." "The Marcello Heritage Trust, the original family wealth, the transfers that established the trust's holdings in Sterling Capital, those were done before my marriage. I was in a room once early on where the structure was discussed. There were some questions about how certain assets were valued at the time of the trust's formation." Silence. "Mark, I'm not saying I have evidence. I'm saying I have recollections. And those recollections, if I submitted them to the right people, the SEC is already looking at Sterling Capital. If I were to provide information suggesting that the trust's holdings themselves were established through irregular valuations— Mark, stop! Howard's voice had changed completely. The careful professional warmth was gone. What replaced it was something more urgent. Stop talking. Right now. I need you to listen to me. Mark stopped. What you are describing, Howard said slowly and with absolute precision, is using confidential knowledge obtained during your marriage to file a potentially retaliatory report with a federal agency. In the context of an active SEC inquiry where you are already a subject. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I'm not filing anything. I'm asking hypothetically. There is no hypothetically in an active federal matter, Mark. None. If you contact the SEC or any regulatory body with information intended to shift focus to Elena or the Marcello Trust, you will be creating a paper trail that suggests you are attempting to interfere with an ongoing investigation. That is obstruction. That is potentially a criminal charge added to existing potential securities violations. A pause. More importantly, and I want you to hear this very carefully, if the trust's formation was entirely legitimate, which I have every reason to believe it was, then you will have filed a false and retaliatory report. That is a separate criminal exposure. Mark said nothing. I know you're hurting, Howard said. I know you're looking for something to hold on to, but this is not it. This is the one move that takes a difficult situation and makes it catastrophic. She took everything from me, Mark said. His voice was quiet, flat, the voice of a man who has moved past anger into something colder and more dangerous. She activated rights she legally held, Howard said. I know that doesn't feel different right now, but the law makes the distinction, and the law is what we're operating inside. He paused. Mark, go for a walk. Call your brother. Don't make any calls to anyone official before Monday when you come to my office. Promise me that. Mark was quiet for a long moment. Mark, promise me. I hear you, Mark said. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table. He turned his phone over in his hand. He thought about Howard's words. He thought about obstruction. He thought about catastrophic. He went for a walk. He walked for an hour through the neighborhood, past houses where families were waking up and making breakfast and living lives that had nothing to do with his. He walked until his legs ached slightly and his thoughts had slowed from a boil to a simmer. He went home and ate the breakfast Rosa had left covered on the stove and read the Sunday paper like a normal person. He almost convinced himself he had listened to Howard. Almost. By Sunday evening, the thought had grown back, larger this time, more specific, more detailed. He knew the name of the attorney who had structured the Marcello Trust's initial formation. He had heard the name in a conversation 20 years ago, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it had stayed with him. An old money family lawyer named Preston Alt, retired now or close to it, but the firm still existed, and the documents from that trust formation would be with the firm. If there were irregularities in those documents, and Mark had heard enough in that long-ago room to believe there might be then a call to the right journalist. Not to the SEC, not officially, just a suggestion to a financial journalist. A name, a firm, a question about the Marcello Trust's formation. He told himself it wasn't obstruction if it was just a conversation. He told himself a lot of things Sunday evening that he would not have believed on Tuesday morning when he was still a man with everything. He did not call Howard again. He called a journalist instead. A man named Peterson, who wrote for a financial wire service and who had interviewed Mark twice in the past, who had always been hungry for a story, who had always been willing to receive a tip from a well-placed source. Peterson answered on the second ring, which told Mark the man never truly turned off. Mark Sterling, Peterson said. I was wondering if I'd hear from you. I have something you might find interesting, Mark said. I'm listening. The Marcello Heritage Trust, the entity that controls Sterling Capital's majority stake. The trust was formed 30 years ago by Elena's family. I have reason to believe the asset valuations used at formation were irregular. I'm not in a position to give you evidence directly, but I can give you a name, an attorney, a firm, and I think if you look at the right documents, you'll find a story." Peterson was quiet for a moment. "This is off the record. Completely. And you understand that anything I publish is going to reference a source close to the situation." "I understand." "All right," Peterson said. "Give me the name." Mark gave him Preston Alt. He gave him the firm name. He described in the careful language of suggestion rather than accusation what he remembered from that conversation 20 years ago. Peterson asked 3 follow-up questions. Mark answered 2 of them and declined the third. Then he ended the call. He sat back. He felt for the first time in 6 days something that resembled agency. He had done something. He had moved a piece on a board that had until this moment been moved entirely by other hands. He went to bed and slept better than he had all week. Monday morning he went to Howard's office. Howard was standing when Mark walked in, which was unusual. Howard was a man who greeted clients seated measured, professionally composed. Standing meant something had already happened. "Sit down," Howard said. Mark sat. "What is it? Did you make a call on Sunday evening?" "Mark?" The question landed with a weight that told Mark the answer was already known. "I spoke with a journalist. I provided a tip about the Marcello Trust's formation. It was completely off the record. I didn't file anything official. I didn't contact the SEC. I gave a journalist a name." "Mark." Howard sat down. He pressed both hands flat on the desk. "Peterson filed his inquiry with the Marcello Trust's attorneys this morning, as part of standard journalistic verification. Within 2 hours, Catherine Walsh's office had contacted our office, and within 1 hour after that, the SEC called our office to inform us that the scope of their inquiry into your conduct has been expanded to include potential obstruction." Mark sat very still. "The journalist verified his source," Howard said. "That's his job. And the moment he did, a chain of events began that I specifically, explicitly told you on Sunday morning not to start. I didn't contact the SEC. You don't have to contact them directly, Mark. When you provide information to a journalist with the explicit intent of damaging the opposing party in an active federal matter, and when that journalist's verification process surfaces your involvement, the intent is documentable." Howard's voice was not angry. It was something harder than angry. It was the voice of a man who sees exactly what is coming and cannot stop it. "This is what I was afraid of. This is precisely what I asked you not to do." Mark opened his mouth. He closed it. "There's more," Howard said. He slid a document across the desk. "Elena's attorneys filed an emergency motion this morning, based on your contact with Peterson, which they have documented through Peterson's verification inquiry. They are now requesting that the court impose a communication restriction order, which would legally prohibit you from contacting any journalist, financial institution, or regulatory body about matters relating to Sterling Capital or the Marcello Trust without prior court approval." Mark picked up the document. He read it. His hands, which had been steady all week, were not entirely steady now. "And the trust investigation," Mark said. "What did Peterson find?" Howard looked at him for a long moment. "Nothing, Mark. Preston Alt's firm provided full documentation of the trust formation to Peterson's legal team within 4 hours. The formation valuations were clean, reviewed and certified by 2 independent auditing firms at the time. The trust's establishment was entirely legitimate." A pause. "There is no story. There never was one. What you remembered from that room 20 years ago was a conversation about a process that was in fact done correctly." Mark set the document down. "I gave Peterson a name to investigate," Mark said slowly, "and the investigation cleared Elena completely." "Yes. And in the process of clearing her, it documented that I was the one who initiated the inquiry." "Yes. Which has now been submitted to the SEC as evidence of attempted obstruction." "Yes," Howard said. "That is exactly what happened." The room was very quiet. Mark thought about Elena's letter, the part about patience, the part about only needing to move once. He thought about the 2 years she had spent preparing. He thought about the fact that when he had finally decided to move, to do something, to fight back with the one weapon he thought he had walked directly into a clean room and left his fingerprints all over it. She had not set a trap. She hadn't needed to. She had simply been clean, and he had done the rest himself. "What happens now?" Mark said. Now we respond to the communication restriction motion. We cooperate fully with the expanded SEC inquiry. We do not make any further unilateral moves." Howard paused. "And Mark, I have to ask you something that I need an honest answer to. Is there anything else? Any other calls, emails, contacts, messages, anything you've done in the last week that I don't know about?" Mark thought about the Sunday walk, the breakfast, the newspaper, the brief period on Sunday afternoon when he had almost convinced himself he had listened. "No," he said. "Just Peterson." Howard held his gaze for a moment. "All right." He gathered the documents back into a folder. "I'm going to need you to be a different person than the one who called Peterson on Sunday night. I need you to be someone who understands that the fight is over. Not the legal process that continues, but the fight, the attempt to win. That has to be over." He looked up. "Can you do that?" Mark sat in Howard's conference room. He thought about everything he had been certain of 1 week ago. He thought about laughing on the phone while Elena walked past him with a box. He thought about the word powerless and how he had applied it to her for years without once examining whether it was true. He thought about the empty closet, the surveillance file, the shareholder notice, David Vance being named interim CEO, Jessica's voice going flat. And now this. The one move he had made, the one moment he had taken back control, had taken him straight into the SEC's expanded inquiry and a communication restriction order. He thought about what Howard had said. Elena had not set a trap. She had simply been clean. "Yes," Mark said, "I can do that." But even as he said it, something in the way he said it, the slight tension in his jaw, the flatness behind his eyes, told Howard Briggs, who had been a lawyer for 31 years and could read a client the way some people read weather, that the man sitting across from him was not finished yet. He was simply quiet for now. And quiet was not the same thing as done. Howard closed the folder. He said nothing more about it. There are things an attorney knows about his client that he files away without comment, waiting to see which way they tip. Mark drove home alone. Rosa had left for the day. The house was empty. He walked through it slowly, room by room, the way you walk through a place when you are trying to memorize it. He stood in the doorway of his office. He looked at the locked desk drawer where he had kept documents. He looked at the bookshelves. He looked at the framed photographs on the wall, business events, award ceremonies, industry conferences, and noticed for the first time that not a single one of them included Elena. Not one. 11 years of marriage, and not a single photograph of his wife on his office wall. He stood in the doorway and looked at those photographs for a long time. Then he went to the kitchen, made himself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and thought about what a man does when he has nothing left to protect, and nothing left to fight with, and nothing left to lose. He did not yet know that the answer to that question was going to cost him everything he had left. The coffee went cold while Mark sat at the kitchen table. He didn't notice. He was thinking about a specific detail that had lodged itself in his mind sometime between Howard's office and the drive home, something small that kept surfacing no matter how many times he pushed it back down. The Peterson call had failed completely. The Marcello Trust was clean. Elena had been cleared in 4 hours. And in those same 4 hours, Mark had handed the SEC a documented example of exactly the kind of conduct they were already investigating him for. He understood all of that. He had understood it the moment Howard laid it out. What he kept coming back to was not the legal consequence. It was the 4 hours. The trust's attorneys had responded to Peterson's verification inquiry in 4 hours with complete certified documentation that shut the story down entirely. That kind of response didn't happen by accident. That kind of response happened when someone had already prepared for the possibility that someone might look. Elena had anticipated that he would try this. He sat at the kitchen table and turned that thought over slowly. She had spent 2 years preparing her case against him. And somewhere in those 2 years, she or her attorneys had also prepared for the possibility that he would fight back dirty. They had made sure the trust's documentation was organized, verified, and ready to be produced quickly. They had left him no room. He hadn't found a weapon. He had walked into a prepared room where every surface was already clean. He put the cold coffee in the sink. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. The next 3 weeks moved in a rhythm that felt nothing like his old life. Howard's office, SEC, preliminary interviews where Mark sat beside his attorney and answered questions in the careful, measured language of a man who understood he was being evaluated for cooperation. The court's communication restriction order was granted. Mark was now legally prohibited from contacting media, financial institutions, or regulatory bodies about anything related to Sterling Capital or the Marcello Trust without court approval. He signed the acknowledgement in a conference room and did not let his face show anything. Raymond Park called once personally, not about business. He called to say that he hoped Mark was managing, that the transition had been difficult for everyone, that the company respected what Mark had built. It was the kind of call that men make when they feel guilty about being on the winning side of something and can't quite admit that out loud. Mark thanked him, kept it brief, and ended the call before Raymond could hear anything in his voice that would become a story later. Jessica sent one email, 3 weeks after the board meeting. It was 2 paragraphs long and written in the careful language of someone whose own attorney had reviewed it before she pressed send. She expressed regret. She wished him well. She did not apologize for the HR statement. Mark read it twice and then moved it to a folder he did not open again. The financial picture became clearer over those 3 weeks, and clearer was not a comfortable word for it. His personal accounts were intact but limited. His access to the lifestyle he had maintained for 11 years, the drivers, the penthouse, the corporate membership clubs, the expense account dinners, was gone. He sold the penthouse. He had to. The carrying costs were not sustainable without the company income, and keeping it felt in a way he couldn't entirely articulate, like maintaining a museum to a version of himself that no longer existed. He told Rosa. She listened, asked if her position at the house was continuing for now, and when he said yes, she nodded and went back to work without commentary. Her steadiness, that same quality he had barely noticed for 9 years, was the most stabilizing thing in his daily life. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the efficiency that characterized everything Elena's legal team did. Catherine Walsh filed, responded, and managed the process with a speed that told Mark they had not only prepared the case, but had pre-built the entire procedural timeline. There was nothing to contest. The prenuptial clause was airtight. The documentation was comprehensive. Howard advised against fighting any element of it, and Mark for once listened completely. The divorce was finalized 41 days after Elena had left the manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Mark received the final decree by email, which was his own fault for agreeing to electronic service. He opened it at the kitchen table. He read his name and Elena's name and the words, "marriage dissolved," and he set the phone face down and sat quietly for 10 minutes. Then he picked it back up, forwarded the document to Howard, and went for a walk. He had started walking every day, not for health reasons, not consciously. It had simply become the thing he did when the house felt too quiet and staying still was not an option. He walked through the neighborhood and thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a new experience for a man who had spent 20 years thinking about everything all the time with maximum intensity. The SEC investigation concluded its preliminary phase 6 weeks after the board meeting. Howard called him on a Thursday afternoon with the summary. "They're recommending a settlement," Howard said. "Civil, not criminal. The cooperation has been noted. The amounts involved, while not insignificant, fall below the threshold they typically pursue criminally when the subject is cooperative and there's no evidence of systemic intent to defraud." "What does the settlement look like?" Mark asked. Howard told him the number. It was large. Not ruinous given his personal assets, but large enough to hurt in a way that was also, Mark recognized, distantly appropriate. He had spent company money on personal activities and categorized it as business. He had done it casually, routinely, without thinking about it as theft, because it had never felt like theft. But the number on the settlement agreement was the weight of all those individual casual decisions added together, and it was heavier than he had expected. "I'll take the settlement," Mark said. "I'll let them know." "Howard." A pause. "Is it over after this?" Howard was quiet for a moment. "The federal matter will be closed. The divorce is done. Sterling Capital's shareholder situation has been resolved." Another pause. "Yes, Mark. After this, it's over." He signed the settlement documents 2 weeks later. He wrote the check from his personal account, which he had never done before for anything of that size, and felt the specific discomfort of paying for something with money he had actually earned, rather than money that flowed through institutional channels he didn't have to think about. He was 51 years old. He had a house, a personal investment portfolio significantly smaller than it used to be, and a daily walk that had become the most structured part of his routine. 3 months after Elena left, Mark received a call from his brother in Chicago. His brother, whose name was Peter, was 4 years older and had spent his life running a small manufacturing business in the Midwest, and being in Mark's former estimation admirably content with a smaller life than Mark's. Mark had always privately thought of Peter as someone who had settled. He had never examined whether that thought said more about Peter or about himself. "How are you actually doing?" Peter asked. Not the version of the question that expects a fine or a managing. The version that means "I want to know." Mark sat down. "I'm sleeping better than I was," he said. "The legal stuff is mostly done." "That's not what I asked." Mark was quiet for a moment. "I don't know who I am without the job," he said. It came out more directly than he intended. "I've been thinking about that. For 11 years I was Sterling Capital. I was the company. And I don't know what I am now that the company is someone else's to run." Peter didn't answer immediately. When he did, he said, "You were always more than the company, Mark. You just didn't spend any time there." Mark held the phone and didn't say anything. "Come to Chicago," Peter said. "Come for a week. Just be somewhere that isn't that house for a while." "I have the house to manage. Rosa manages the house. You know that." Mark smiled briefly for the first time in weeks. "Yeah, she does." "Come," Peter said. "Come be a person for a week. Not an executive, not a subject of an investigation. Just a person." He went to Chicago. He spent 8 days at Peter's house, where Peter's wife cooked large dinners, and Peter's 2 teenage grandchildren treated Mark with the cheerful indifference teenagers apply to adults who have not yet proved themselves interesting. Mark found it unexpectedly the most restoring 8 days he had spent in years. He came back to New York in October, 5 months after the envelope. The city was the same. His street was the same. Rosa had kept the house exactly as he'd left it, which he had expected, and had also quietly removed the framed photographs from his office wall, which he had not expected, and which he found he did not mind at all. He started consulting. Small work at first, advisory conversations with younger executives who needed someone who had operated at a high level and understood the mechanics of large-scale corporate maneuvering. He was good at it. He was honest in those conversations in a way he had not been honest in professional settings for a long time, and the honesty made him better at the work, not worse. He did not think about Elena constantly, but he thought about her often. Not with longing exactly. With something more complicated. The kind of thought you have about someone when you understand too late that you never actually knew them, and the knowing of that is both a loss and a lesson at the same time. 5 years passed. They passed the way years pass after the thing that defines them, with a mixture of ordinary days and occasional revelations, with slow accumulations of different habits and different understandings, with the specific quiet of a life that has been reduced to its actual size and found in that reduction something more honest than what it replaced. Mark was 56 years old. He had sold the house in the 4th year after it had become clear that the house was a container for a life that he was no longer living, and keeping it was a form of preservation that didn't serve him. He lived in a smaller apartment. He walked every day. He talked to Peter every Sunday. He had a consulting practice that was not large, but was his in a way that Sterling Capital, it turned out, had never entirely been. He was eating lunch alone at a diner near his apartment on a Tuesday in November when he saw the news report on the television mounted to the wall above the counter. He was not looking for it. He happened to look up at the right moment. The report was about Sterling Capital Group's expansion into European markets. The anchor described the company as one of the most dynamic growth stories in American finance over the past 5 years. The screen showed a press conference. David Vance was speaking at a podium, composed and measured, saying something about long-term strategy. Beside him, slightly back from the podium, stood Elena. Mark set down his fork. Elena Sterling looked exactly like herself. She was wearing a dark jacket. Her posture was what it had always been, straight, composed entirely without performance. She was not smiling for the cameras. She was listening to David with the focused attention of someone who has already heard this speech and approves of every word. The camera panned slightly, and Mark saw in that brief pan the way David turned his head toward her when he finished a sentence. Not for approval, for something quieter, for the instinctive check of two people who trust each other completely. The anchor said something about the company's revenue. Mark heard a number that was 3 times what Sterling Capital had been generating when he ran it. He heard the anchor use the word transformed. He heard the phrase under the current leadership team. He did not hear his own name. A woman at the press conference raised her hand and asked Elena directly, "Mrs. Sterling, can you speak to how the company moved past the challenges of 5 years ago?" Elena looked at the journalist. She was quiet for exactly 1 beat, the way she had always been quiet before she spoke that fraction of a pause that meant she was choosing her words with care. Then she said, "We removed what was holding us back and focused on building something better." That was it. 1 sentence. No elaboration. No reference to what had been removed. No name. No story. No performance of victory. Mark sat at the diner counter. The lunch rush moved around him. A man next to him asked the counter attendant for the check. The television moved on to the next story. The world continued at its ordinary speed. He picked up his fork. He ate the rest of his lunch. He thought about that 1 sentence. We removed what was holding us back. Not I. We. Elena had moved from singular to plural with such ease that the transition was almost invisible. She had not just rebuilt the company. She had built a life that the company was part of, a life that included David, that included purpose and direction, and the particular momentum of someone who decided 5 years ago to stop being patient and start being free. And she had done it without ever once looking back long enough to say his name. Mark understood sitting at that counter that this was the thing he had not been prepared for. Not the loss of the money, though the money had stung. Not the loss of the career, though the career had defined him for so long that losing it had felt like losing a limb. Not even the divorce, though signing those papers had cost him something, he was still 5 years later working out how to name. The thing he had not been prepared for was the irrelevance. He had spent his life in rooms where his presence mattered, where people adjusted when he walked in, where conversations changed when he spoke, where his opinion was the one that settled things. He had been for 2 decades a man whose absence was noticed. Elena had simply stopped noticing, not as a punishment, not as a performance of indifference. She had genuinely moved on into a life in which he was not a factor, not a memory worth dwelling on, not even an enemy worth maintaining. He had become a former chapter in a book she had stopped rereading. That, he thought, was the real verdict. Not the SEC settlement, not the board resolution, not the divorce decree. The real verdict was this: a journalist asking about the challenges of 5 years ago, and Elena giving a 1-sentence answer that contained no trace of him at all. He paid his check. He put on his coat. He walked out of the diner into the November afternoon. He walked his usual route, past the park, down the long block with the bookstore he had started stopping in on Wednesday afternoons, past the coffee place where the owner knew his order. Small anchors of a smaller life. Ordinary in a way his former life had never been, and in that ordinariness, strangely, solidly real. He thought about something Peter had said to him 2 years ago during one of their Sunday calls. Peter had said, "The worst thing that ever happened to you might end up being the best thing if you let it teach you instead of just hurt you." Mark had not agreed when Peter said it. He had thought it was the kind of thing a person says when they want to offer comfort and don't have anything more precise. He thought about it differently now. He had not become a better man in any simple or clean way. He had not transformed the way stories sometimes want their subjects to transform into someone unrecognizable. He was still capable of impatience, still capable of certainty that outran his actual knowledge, still capable of the particular blindness that comes from spending too much time inside your own priorities. But he had learned in the 5 years since an envelope on a kitchen counter had ended his perfect lie what it actually cost to look past people, what it cost to treat someone's silence as emptiness, what it cost to confuse loyalty with powerlessness and patience with surrender. He had learned it the most expensive way a person can learn anything, by living through the consequence of not knowing it. He turned the corner onto his street. His phone buzzed. A text from Peter. Sunday call, still on Linda, made chilly. He typed back immediately, I'll be there. He put his phone in his pocket and walked the last half block to his building. He was not the man who had laughed on the phone while his wife carried the last box from their bedroom. That man was gone, dismantled, with the same precision and patience with which Elena had dismantled everything he had built on a false foundation. In his place was something quieter, smaller, more honest about what it was. He unlocked his door. He went inside. He hung up his coat. Somewhere across the city, Elena Sterling was building something that did not include him, and it was extraordinary, and it was hers, and it would outlast everything he had ever claimed to own. And the man who had once called her loyalty, practically her only personality trait, now lived alone in a smaller apartment, walked the same streets every day, and understood with the clarity that only comes to people who have lost everything they thought they deserved, that the greatest thing Elena had ever done for him was leave. She had not destroyed him. She had simply stopped holding him up. And the falling, painful and complete and entirely of his own making, had finally at the end set him free.